A single empire in Europe once controlled over a quarter of the planet's land, and a quarter of its people. This empire began on the small island of England. A powerful monarchy laid the foundations for what would become an extraordinary story of exploration, expansion, and domination. The British Empire witnessed incredible triumphs of human achievement, but it also revealed some of the darkest sides of humanity. After the discovery of the Americas, about 500 years ago, the British set sail across the oceans. They encountered unfamiliar civilizations, forged new alliances, and created bitter rivalries. Within just 4 centuries, the empire's value would rise to more than $600 billion. But how did an empire that stretched across the Americas, Asia, Africa, and even Australia eventually come to an end? To understand that, we need to go back to the very beginning. Long before global exploration, England faced its own battles at home. In 878 AD, King Alfred the Great fought to defend his small Anglo-Saxon kingdom from invading Viking armies led by Guthrum. Forced to retreat to the marshes of Somerset, Alfred regrouped with loyal followers. He built a strong army, and at the Battle of Edington, Alfred defeated the Viking leader. This victory forced Guthrum to accept peace and sign the Treaty of Wedmore. England was divided. Vikings ruled one part, the Anglo-Saxons ruled the other. But Alfred's work laid the foundation for unity. Years later, his grandson, Athelstan, would complete the task. In 927 AD, Athelstan conquered Northumbria. For the first time, England was united under one crown. Centuries later, English rulers turned their eyes outward. In 1171, King Henry II set sail for Ireland. He demanded submission from Irish kings and gained recognition from church leaders. Ireland became the first colony of England. 100 years later, another conquest began. In 1277, King Edward I launched an invasion of Wales. He defeated the Welsh ruler, Llywelyn, and built massive castles to secure English control. By 1282, Wales was fully under English rule. But England's struggles were far from over. From 1337 to 1453, the Hundred Years' War with France drained resources and weakened both nations. Soon after, England fell into its own civil war. The Wars of the Roses, fought between the House of Lancaster and the House of York. After 3 decades of bloodshed, the Lancastrians prevailed, and Henry Tudor became King Henry VII. Meanwhile, the world itself was changing. In 1492, Christopher Columbus crossed the Atlantic and reached the Americas. His discovery sparked a wave of exploration and colonization. England wanted to take part. In 1497, Italian explorer John Cabot, backed by King Henry VII, set sail from Bristol. He reached Newfoundland, planting the English flag on new lands. This marked England's first step into the New World. But Cabot's second voyage vanished without a trace. Still, his achievements inspired England to look westward. Back home, King Henry VIII sat on the throne. He desperately wanted a male heir, but his marriage to Catherine of Aragon produced only one surviving daughter, Mary. When the Pope refused to grant him a divorce, Henry made a bold move. He broke away from the Catholic Church. In 1534, the Act of Supremacy created the Church of England, with Henry as its head. After Henry's death, his daughter Mary briefly restored Catholicism with brutal force, earning her the name Bloody Mary. But her reign was short. Her half-sister Elizabeth I became queen and firmly re-established Protestant rule. By Elizabeth's time, the race for colonies was well underway. Spain, Portugal, and France were seizing vast territories across the Americas. Elizabeth wanted England to compete. She authorized privateers, nicknamed the Sea Dogs, to raid Spanish ships and claim riches for England. One of them, John Hawkins, became infamous for introducing England to the transatlantic slave trade. He captured and sold enslaved Africans in the Caribbean, making massive profits and earning a knighthood. Another sea dog, Francis Drake, set out to find a route around the Americas to Asia. Braving storms and hostile seas, he sailed around South America, up the Pacific coast, and even reached California. From there, he crossed the Pacific, through the Spice Islands, around Africa, and back to England. After 3 years, Drake completed his circumnavigation of the globe. In 1580, Queen Elizabeth knighted him aboard his ship, the Golden Hind. These voyages marked a turning point. The English crown realized that to grow into a true empire, England would need colonies in the New World. In 1584, Queen Elizabeth I granted Sir Walter Raleigh permission to explore and colonize the New World. He sent an expedition to Roanoke Island, off the coast of present-day North Carolina. About 100 men went, soldiers, scientists, and artisans. At first, they built a fort and traded with local Native American tribes. But over time, food shortages, disease, and tension with the tribes weakened the colony. When Sir Francis Drake stopped by on his return to England, many colonists chose to go home with him. By 1586, the first Roanoke colony had failed. A second attempt in 1587 also vanished, abandoned only 3 years later. Dramatic pause, music shift. Soon after, Spain made its move. In 1588, King Philip II launched the Spanish Armada, a massive fleet of 130 ships and over 30,000 men. It was one of the most feared naval forces in history. But England, though outnumbered, had smaller, faster ships and better tactics. They harassed the Spanish from a distance, then sent fire ships burning into their ranks. The Armada broke formation, panic spread, and the English pressed their advantage. The final showdown came at the Battle of Gravelines, off the coast of France. After hours of fierce fighting, the Armada retreated, battered and disorganized. On their way home, storms finished what the English had started. By the time the survivors reached Spain, the once great Armada was in ruins. Dramatic pause, shift to Ireland. Meanwhile, closer to home, England sought to tighten its grip on Ireland. The Pale, around Dublin, was under English control, but most of the island still followed Gaelic law. Hugh O'Neill, the Earl of Tyrone, had had enough. He and Hugh O'Donnell led a rebellion in what became known as the 9 Years' War. For years, Irish and English forces clashed. The Irish even gained support from Spain, but at the decisive Battle of Kinsale in 1601, they were crushed. By 1603, O'Neill surrendered. The Treaty of Mellifont granted pardons, but Gaelic culture, language, and Catholicism were suppressed. Ireland was to be transformed into an English land. Dramatic pause, shift to Jamestown. But England's ambitions stretched beyond Ireland. In 1606, the Virginia Company was formed to colonize the New World. The next year, settlers landed on a marshy peninsula and founded Jamestown. The land looked beautiful. Forests, rivers, and wildlife. But reality was harsh. Heat, disease, hunger, and clashes with the Powhatan Confederacy nearly destroyed the colony. During the starving time in 1609, settlers ate whatever they could find, even horses and leather. Most died. But survival came through a new crop, tobacco. John Rolfe introduced it, and it thrived. Tobacco brought wealth, settlers, and stability. At last, England had its first permanent colony in America. Dramatic pause, shift to India. While Jamestown grew, England's reach extended east. In 1608, William Hawkins arrived in India and met Emperor Jahangir of the Mughal Empire. This meeting led to the first English trading post in Surat. By 1615, diplomat Sir Thomas Roe deepened the relationship, securing privileges for English traders. Spices, textiles, and indigo flowed back to England. The beginnings of empire in India had begun. Dramatic pause, shift to religion, and the Mayflower. Back home, religion was dividing the kingdom. King James demanded everyone follow the Church of England. Those who refused, the Pilgrims, dreamed of a place where they could worship freely. In 1620, they set sail on the Mayflower. The journey was brutal. Storms nearly sank the ship, but after months at sea, they reached Cape Cod. That first winter was devastating. Illness and hunger killed more than half the settlers. But the survivors endured, building homes, forming communities, and establishing the Plymouth colony. Their faith and resilience laid the foundations for English settlement in New England. In 1624, English settlers landed on the island of St. Christopher, today called St. Kitts. A year later, French Captain Pierre Desnambuc arrived, and together with the English, he formed a joint colony. But beneath the surface, danger brewed. The native Kalinago, led by Chief Tegramante, planned a secret attack. Yet, the plan was betrayed by Barbe, a captured Arawak woman. On the night of the full moon, the English and French struck first. Hundreds of Kalinago were slaughtered, and by morning, thousands more were killed as they tried to surrender. The place would forever be remembered as Bloody Point and Bloody River. With the Kalinago gone, the colonists faced a problem. Who would work the tobacco fields? Their answer was Africa. And so, the transatlantic slave trade expanded. By the 1630s, the English spread across the Caribbean. Barbados, Nevis, Montserrat, and Antigua. Sugar, tobacco, and slavery bound the islands to England's growing empire. Dramatic pause. Meanwhile, at home, Puritans were facing persecution. King Charles I demanded conformity to the Church of England. He dissolved Parliament and ruled alone. For the Puritans, there was only one answer: leave. In 1630, John Winthrop led 11 ships and 700 settlers to Massachusetts Bay. He declared they would be a city upon a hill, a moral beacon to the world. Soon, tens of thousands of Puritans followed in the Great Migration, spreading across New England. New colonies like Connecticut and Rhode Island grew, each with their own vision of religious freedom. But they weren't alone. In 1632, Lord Baltimore established Maryland as a haven for Catholics. By 1634, settlers arrived at St. Mary's City, where Protestants and Catholics lived side by side. At the same time, Scotland resisted King Charles's attempts to impose Anglicanism. The Covenanter army rose in defiance, forcing Charles to back down. For now, peace, but tension lingered. Dramatic pause, shift to India. Far to the east, the British East India Company was expanding. In 1639, agents Francis Day and Andrew Cogan secured land on the Coromandel coast. Here they built a humble trading post, which grew into Fort St. George, the foundation of English power in India. Dramatic pause, shift back to Ireland. But Ireland once again erupted in rebellion. In 1641, Catholic lords, angered by land seizures, rose against English settlers. Violence spread. Massacres in towns like Portadown, saw Protestants drowned in rivers. In retaliation, Catholics were slaughtered on Rathlin Island. To restore order, Catholic leaders united as the Confederation of Kilkenny. They pledged loyalty to Charles I, but sought an autonomous Catholic Ireland. Yet war was spreading across the British Isles. In 1642, King Charles clashed with Parliament. The Civil War had begun. At Edgehill, at Marston Moor, and at Newbury, battles raged, but no side prevailed. Until 1645, at Naseby. There, Oliver Cromwell's disciplined New Model Army crushed the Royalists. King Charles was captured, tried for treason, and executed. England was now a republic. Cromwell ruled as Lord Protector. To him, Catholicism was dangerous, and Ireland would pay the price. In 1649, his troops stormed Drogheda and Wexford, slaughtering thousands. Across Ireland, Catholic lands were seized, priests executed, and communities destroyed. Scotland, too, was subdued. Its clans dismantled, its forests cut down, its culture broken. Cromwell believed he was civilizing, but many saw only devastation. He also struck abroad. In 1655, English forces seized Jamaica from Spain. Prisoners of war and rebels were sent there as forced laborers to grow sugar. By 1660, Cromwell was dead, and the monarchy restored. King Charles II wasted no time. He created new colonies: Carolina in America, forts in Africa, and a powerful new slave trading company. In 1664, his forces seized New Amsterdam from the Dutch, renaming it New York. Though the Dutch struck back in Africa and the Caribbean, peace came with the Treaty of Breda. The English kept New York, while the Dutch kept Suriname. Meanwhile, two French fur traders, Radisson and Groseilliers, revealed the riches of Hudson Bay. Arrested by their own government, they turned to the English. Backed by Prince Rupert, they sailed north in 1668. The fort they built at the Rupert River became the base of the Hudson's Bay Company, an empire of fur that still exists today. Dramatic pause, shift to America. By 1675, New England's population exploded. But expansion pushed settlers onto Wampanoag land. Tensions rose, and when 3 native men were executed, Metacom, known as King Philip, declared war. Villages burned, both sides starved, and entire tribes were pulled into the conflict. But in 1676, Metacom was betrayed and killed. The war ended in devastation. Native lands seized, cultures shattered. Dramatic pause, shift to new faith. Back in England, new voices rose. The Quakers. They preached equality, saying every person carried an inner light. Titles, kings, and hierarchy meant nothing. For this, they were persecuted. But William Penn had a vision. In 1681, he was granted land in America. There he founded Pennsylvania, the city of brotherly love. A holy experiment, where all could live as equals under God. Dramatic pause, shift to revolution. But England was once again in turmoil. When Catholic King James II took the throne, Protestants feared a dynasty of Catholic monarchs. In 1688, William of Orange invaded. James fled, and Parliament offered William and Mary the crown. The Glorious Revolution had begun. A Bill of Rights followed, securing Parliament's supremacy over the monarchy. News spread across the Atlantic. In America, settlers rose up, ousting Catholic governors and pledging loyalty to William and Mary. Meanwhile, France resisted. Battles stretched from Europe to Canada to the Caribbean. At the Battle of the Boyne, William's army triumphed, securing Protestant rule in Britain and Ireland. The war raged on until the Treaty of Ryswick in 1697, which ended French offensives and confirmed William as king. But far to the east, conflict was just beginning. In India, the East India Company challenged the Mughal Empire itself. Their demands were rejected by Emperor Aurangzeb, who seized their factories and soldiers. The stage was set for the next chapter, England's Wars of Empire. In 1690, the Mughal fleet under Sidi Yaqub blockaded Bombay. For a year, the English East India Company resisted famine and siege. At last, they surrendered. Envoys were sent to Emperor Aurangzeb, who demanded humiliation and a fine of 150,000 rupees, nearly 4.5 million today. Only then did he order the siege lifted. The company regained Bombay and soon built a new base, Calcutta. Dramatic pause, shift to Britain. In 1702, Queen Anne ascended the throne. The British Isles were divided: 4 kingdoms, 3 parliaments, and 1 monarch. Scotland had its own parliament, as did Ireland, while England and Wales shared one. But Scotland's economy was failing. Elites sought union, and with bribes from London, the Scottish Parliament was dissolved. On May 1, 1707, Scotland and England joined into a single Parliament of Great Britain. The poor raged, but were ignored. For England, this was the birth of Great Britain, the first step toward empire. Dramatic pause, shift to war. Peace with France did not last. When Spain's childless king died, rival claimants to the throne split Europe in war. The English feared a Catholic superpower. France and Spain united. And so, the War of the Spanish Succession began. In America, battles erupted. At Fort Albany, French cannons tore down English defenses. In Acadia, the English besieged Port Royal. After days of bombardment, the French surrendered. Port Royal became Annapolis Royal, a symbol of English victory. When the war ended in 1713, the Treaty of Utrecht crowned Philip of Anjou as King of Spain. But more importantly, it gave Britain new power. They gained Nova Scotia, Newfoundland, Gibraltar, and the Asiento de Negros, the monopoly over the Atlantic slave trade. Britain's empire would now be built on human bondage. Dramatic pause, shift to Carolinas. In 1712, Carolina split into North and South. South Carolina prospered on fertile land and sugar production. To fuel it, new slave codes legalized brutal control. Runaways were whipped, branded, mutilated, or executed. Slaves became property, worked to death in fields and plantations. Sugar cane drove the demand. Across the Caribbean, enslaved Africans labored in scorching heat, cutting cane from dawn to night. Between 1710 and 1720 alone, Britain transported 200,000 Africans to the Americas. Sugar was sweet, but bought with suffering. Dramatic pause, shift to Georgia. In 1732, James Oglethorpe envisioned a colony for England's worthy poor. Georgia banned slavery, granting small farms instead of plantations. But the ban was short-lived. By 1751, slavery was legalized, and wealthy planters dominated. Dramatic pause, shift to war. Meanwhile, conflict brewed with Spain. British merchant Robert Jenkins had his ear cut off by Spanish sailors. He showed it in Parliament, and England demanded revenge. The War of Jenkins' Ear began. Battles raged in Florida and Georgia. At Bloody Marsh, Oglethorpe's troops forced the Spanish back to St. Augustine. The war spread to India, where French and English fought over the Carnatic. French victories mounted, even capturing Madras. Dramatic pause, shift to Europe. Then came the War of Austrian Succession. Armies clashed across Europe and colonies alike. At Lothel in 1747, British and Dutch forces battled the French, ending in stalemate. By 1748, the Treaty of Aix-la-Chapelle restored the balance. But the rivalry between Britain and France burned hotter than ever. Dramatic pause, shift to America. In the Ohio Valley, settlers pushed west. George Washington, just 22, was sent to secure British claims. At Jumonville Glen, his troops killed a French officer, sparking outrage. Forced to surrender at Fort Necessity, Washington unwittingly ignited global war. Dramatic pause, build tension. The 7 Years' War, history's first true world war. It spread across Europe, the Americas, Africa, and India. In Bengal, the Nawab Siraj-ud-Dowlah captured Calcutta. 146 English prisoners were crammed into a dungeon, the Black Hole of Calcutta. Only 23 survived. Britain sought revenge. At the Battle of Plassey, Robert Clive forged alliances and betrayed the Nawab. Mir Jafar defected, and Clive's victory gave Britain control of Bengal. In India, British victories at Madras and Wandiwash shattered French power. In Canada, Wolfe and Montcalm faced off at Quebec. The British stormed the cliffs, winning the Plains of Abraham. Both generals died, but Britain seized Quebec. By 1760, Montreal had fallen. By 1761, Pondicherry in India was captured. In the Caribbean, Britain seized islands from France and Havana from Spain. Dramatic pause, resolution. In 1763, the Treaty of Paris redrew the world map. Britain gained Canada, Florida, and dominance in India. The Union Jack flew across continents. But victory came at a price. War left Britain in debt. To keep peace with native tribes, Parliament banned settlement west of the Appalachians. Yet settlers ignored the line, and Pontiac's warriors prepared for war. The empire had reached its peak. But new storms were gathering. In 1763, native warriors surrounded British forts across North America. They fought to protect their land and way of life. The British fought back, and peace came a year later. At the same time, far away in India, the British East India Company gained the right to collect taxes. This was the start of British power in India. To raise money, Britain taxed its American colonies. But colonists protested, no taxation without representation. Tensions grew. In 1768, Captain James Cook set sail. 2 years later, he reached Australia, mapping new lands and claiming them for Britain. By now, the British Empire stretched across the globe. But in America, anger turned to revolution. On July 4, 1776, the Declaration of Independence was signed. Soon, George Washington's army was at war with Britain. After early struggles, victories at Trenton and Saratoga gave the Americans hope. France joined their side, and in 1781, the British surrendered at Yorktown. America was free. Britain looked elsewhere. In 1787, the first fleet of settlers and convicts arrived in Australia. Life was hard, but a new colony was born. In Canada, Britain created Upper and Lower Canada in 1791. Loyalists who had fled America settled in the north, while French Canadians kept their language and traditions. Some freed slaves moved on to Africa, building the town of Freetown. In Ireland, rebellion broke out in 1798, but it was crushed. By 1801, Ireland became part of the United Kingdom. In India, powerful rulers resisted Britain. Tipu Sultan fell in 1799, and the Marathas were defeated by 1818. Britain now controlled most of India. At sea, Admiral Nelson's victory at Trafalgar in 1805 gave Britain naval power. In 1807, the slave trade was abolished across the empire. More wars followed. America and Britain clashed again in 1812. Later, Britain fought in Asia, gaining Singapore in 1819 and expanding into Burma by 1826. At home, Catholics won more rights in 1829. Abroad, conflicts with indigenous peoples continued, especially in Tasmania. Finally, in 1833, Britain abolished slavery in its empire. Enslaved people were freed, though compensation went to their former owners, not to them. The British Empire stood vast and powerful, but behind its victories were stories of struggle, resistance, and the fight for freedom. In 1836, South Australia was officially proclaimed, and Adelaide came to life amid great celebration. To the east, Major Thomas Mitchell explored the fertile lands of southeast New South Wales, inspiring settlers to dream of new beginnings. By 1837, Victoria became a recognized colony, and the city of Batmania was renamed Melbourne. Across the world in China, the British faced a problem. Their love for Chinese tea clashed with the Qing dynasty's refusal to trade. Britain's only commodity of interest was Indian opium, a drug devastating Chinese lives. Lin Zexu, appointed by the Qing emperor, responded decisively, confiscating and burning massive stockpiles of opium in Guangzhou. The British Empire, seeing this as an attack on trade, sent its navy. Their superior firepower overwhelmed the Qing forces, forcing China into the Treaty of Nanking. The treaty ceded Hong Kong, opened Chinese ports to British trade, and allowed the sale of opium. Meanwhile, across the seas, British settlers moved to New Zealand, home to the Maori people. Lieutenant Governor William Hobson drafted the Treaty of Waitangi, but a mistranslation caused conflict. The English version ceded sovereignty to Britain, while the Maori version suggested they retained authority. When the British began buying land under European rules unfamiliar to the Maori, Chief Hon Heke realized the consequences. In protest, he famously felled the Union Jack multiple times, sparking battles in Kororareka, where musket and cannon fire turned the town into a battlefield. In India, the Sikh Empire faced a crisis after Maharaja Ranjit Singh's death. British forces clashed with the Sikhs in the First Anglo-Sikh War, winning hard-fought victories. The Treaty of Lahore ceded territory to Britain. When resistance continued, the British decisively defeated the Sikhs at the Battle of Gujarat, annexing Punjab in 1849. To consolidate control, Lord Dalhousie introduced the doctrine of lapse, annexing states without heirs. Discontent among Indian soldiers, the sepoys, boiled over. In 1857, Mangal Pandey's mutiny sparked a larger rebellion. The revolt spread to Delhi, where rebels briefly captured the Red Fort, holding the city as a symbol of freedom. But British forces recaptured Delhi after intense street-to-street fighting, ending the Mughal dynasty's rule. The Indian Rebellion led to the British government dissolving the East India Company. In 1858, the British Raj began, placing India under direct control of Queen Victoria. A council of British officials governed. English schools were established, and the empire tightened its political and social grip. In New Zealand, the Maori faced similar oppression with land confiscations under the New Zealand Settlements Act. Attempts to resist in the Waikato, Taranaki, and Te Kuti Wars failed. In Jamaica, a small protest in Morant Bay in 1865 escalated violently. Led by Paul Bogle, locals confronted authorities. Britain responded with brutal force, executing leaders and dissolving the local government, asserting total control. Across Africa, the British expanded their influence through treaties, wars, and protectorates. In the Gold Coast, the Ashanti were defeated and forced to surrender. Fiji voluntarily became a British protectorate. The Suez Canal, completed in 1869, became a strategic lifeline for Britain, securing access to India. The British also fought Zulus and Boers in South Africa, using superior technology and harsh strategies like scorched earth and concentration camps. By 1902, the Boer republics were absorbed into the empire. By the early 20th century, Britain's empire stretched across the globe, earning the phrase, "The sun never sets on the British Empire." Some colonies gained limited self-governance, like Canada and Australia, but most lands remained under strict British control. In Persia, oil discoveries in Masjid-i-Suleiman in 1908 prompted Britain to strengthen its influence. Across the world, imperial rivalries simmered, setting the stage for a global conflict. On June 28, 1914, the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand sparked the First World War. But behind the headlines, the war was also about empires. Britain, France, Germany, and Austria-Hungary all sought to expand their territories. The British Expeditionary Force confronted the Germans at Mons, beginning the brutal, entrenched warfare that would define the conflict. This version keeps the drama, maintains historical clarity, and avoids overloading the listener with too many names, dates, and battles. The Western Front in World War I was a maze of trenches, stalemated by relentless fighting. Seeking another path to victory, the Allies launched the Gallipoli campaign. British, Australian, and New Zealand forces aimed to seize the Dardanelles, hoping to knock the Ottoman Empire out of the war. But rugged terrain, fierce resistance, and heavy casualties turned the campaign into a prolonged nightmare. Meanwhile, secret plans were underway for the Middle East. Under the Sykes-Picot Agreement, France would control modern-day Syria and Lebanon, while Britain took Jordan, southern Iraq, and much of today's Israel. Back in Europe, the Battle of the Somme erupted in July. Machine guns and fortified defenses stalled advances, turning Somme into a symbol of the war's futility. Later battles, Arras and Passchendaele, added to the relentless toll, with mud, blood, and exhaustion dominating the front. A turning point came with Germany's Spring Offensive. Initially successful, it faltered under fresh American troops and Allied resilience. The 100 Days Offensive followed, pushing Germany back and bringing an armistice in November 1918. The Treaty of Versailles in 1919 stripped Germany of its colonies, with Britain and France claiming Tanganyika, Cameroon, Togoland, and territories in the Pacific. The Ottoman Empire was dissolved, and the British Empire reached its global peak. Yet, as history teaches, even the sun must set. In India, resentment against colonial rule grew. The Rowlatt Act of 1919 allowed arrests without trial, sparking protests led by Mahatma Gandhi. His philosophy of satyagraha, resistance through peaceful insistence on truth, guided millions. But peaceful protest could still meet violence. At Jallianwala Bagh, 1,500 innocent people were killed by British troops, shocking the world. Ireland also tested resistance. In 1918, voters backed Sinn Féin, demanding independence. By 1919, the Irish Republican Army rose under Michael Collins, fighting the Black and Tans. Bloody Sunday in 1920 saw reprisals and ambushes, marking a bitter struggle. Eventually, the Anglo-Irish Treaty of 1921 created the Irish Free State, while 6 northern counties remained under British rule. Back in India, Gandhi's Salt March of 1930 demonstrated the power of civil disobedience. Traveling 240 miles to Dandi, Gandhi and his followers peacefully defied the salt tax. Millions joined, boycotting British goods, refusing taxes, and challenging colonial laws, all without violence. By 1935, limited self-governance arrived through the Government of India Act, and the first elections followed in 1937. But the world's attention soon shifted to a new threat. In 1939, Germany invaded Poland, and Britain declared war, beginning World War II. Early struggles saw Dunkirk's evacuation and the Battle of Britain, as Londoners endured relentless bombing. America's entry in 1941 bolstered the Allies. Victories at El Alamein, D-Day in Normandy, and campaigns across Europe brought the fall of Hitler in 1945. With victory in Europe, the era of empire began to fade. Colonies grew restless. India's independence came in 1947, splitting into India and Pakistan. Across Africa, nations followed suit. Ghana in 1957, Malaya in 1957, Nigeria, Uganda, Kenya, and beyond in the 1960s. The Caribbean also celebrated freedom, with Jamaica and Trinidad and Tobago emerging as independent nations. Even the last remnants of empire fell in time. Zimbabwe gained independence after years of struggle, and in 1997, Hong Kong returned to China, marking the end of Britain's colonial era. The sun had finally set on the British Empire. Its history, built on conquest, trade, and culture, left scars and legacies still felt around the world. As darkness falls over London, the story of the empire continues to be written, a testament to a world forever changed.